Hi, everyone, and welcome to Real Talk, Leadership Lessons from the Field. I'm Audrey George of Audrey George Consulting, and I'm thrilled to introduce our co-host and our guest for today's episode. First, our co-host is Ashley Plump. Ashley is a licensed realtor and a healthcare professional. She'll share more about her adventure and her career in just a second. And Chuck Zich is with us as our special guest. He's the owner of Terra Logistics. Thanks so much to both of you for being here.
Of
Thanks
course,
for having me.
for having us.
So I do want to start with both of your backgrounds because I think they're both unique in different ways. And Ashley, as I just mentioned, let's start with you. Can you talk about your field, your career, and what you've done so far?
Yes, so I currently work in healthcare, like Audrey mentioned. A little bit about my background and how I got here. So previously, I worked in outpatient physical therapy for 5 years. That is the career that pretty much led me to Texas, which is where I am at now. I've always been kind of a go-getter. I had never been to Texas before I moved here, but I pretty much used my previous profession to learn the lay of the land, network, get my name out there. As a regional manager, that was my job for a new company in a new market. So I transitioned from that into real estate. It just made sense, honestly. That's pretty much what I was doing in physical therapy. Like I said, building connections, meeting people, branding myself in the company that I worked for. I was managing 20 clinics throughout the DFW region. As a brand new outsider, I had never been here. So I pretty much took my knowledge from that career and put it into real estate. So I've been doing that for, it just made 3 years now since I've been in real estate. I had my biggest year thus far last year. It was an amazing year for myself as a new professional and as a transplant for myself. So yeah, I pretty much transitioned into my current corporate position from the real estate world. So I work as an account manager for a healthcare provider here in Dallas. I felt like it made sense, honestly. A lot of people think I'm kind of crazy for, building a business and still having a corporate job. But again, I'm not from here, so I try to think outside of the box a lot. How can I continue to build a name for myself, build a brand for myself, and still make money because I'm a single person living here by myself. So it just kind of makes sense the same way I build connections and, again, make a brand and a name for myself in my healthcare profession. I do the exact same things in real estate. So yeah, that's pretty much what I do. I've always been a healthcare professional. So just utilizing the skills from my corporate professions and adding them to my business.
Thanks for sharing that, Ashley. And I think you connect dots that other people wouldn't naturally connect when you say we'll go from healthcare and running therapy clinics to running a real estate because that's a natural step. I think you needed to explain that a little bit like you just did for most people to catch that, but it makes a lot of sense when you describe it that way. And I'm excited to have you and Chuck paired today because Chuck is also someone that I consider very similar to you, actually. He's a hustler, he's a go-getter. You both are very much kind of have that about your spirits. I would call you both natural entrepreneurs. And Chuck also has a very interesting career trajectory. And Chuck, if you want to start from the beginning, and kind of
Sure,
walk us through what you've done and where you are now and what you're up to.
sure. So I went to Marquette and I got a marketing degree. But before that, I worked. My dad owned a business or started a business in store fixture manufacturing. So basically building displays for stores like Kohl's, CVS, Lowe's, whatever you go buy, they're on racking or tables. And so they would make that from scratch. So I would work there in the summers and then go, and I went, back to school during the normal period, got my degree. And then I had a choice whether to stay in Milwaukee and do kind of a sports marketing thing or kind of join the family business. And I've always worked retail my whole life. During high school, I worked at an old movie store called Suncoast. I would work there in the mornings and then I would go upstairs and work at GameStop the same day. So I just really liked retail. I know a lot of people don't, but I just liked it. And I ended up being a third key and an assistant manager while I was going to school. So that was kind of my first exposure to leadership. And that was just, a regional manager, just seeing that I took pride in the store and everything and said, hey, we're going to make you a key holder. So I was able to manage a couple different people, close the store, open the store. Then I joined Colony Display in 2004 as an entry-level project manager. So I didn't work for my father. He had a partner, so I never really interacted with him. That was kind of their policy. And so I did project management for about 4 years. I ran really big accounts, buying raw material, just learning how to build things. It was tough. I remember just meeting with the engineers, like, how the heck do you even know every little thing there is to know? And experience is just a huge thing. And then my jump into leadership at Colony, we had a huge inventory problem. The company had like $25 million of inventory. So every time you bought something, and they didn't have a system for it back when I was a project manager. So I actually explained this to upper management, and they didn't want to do anything about it. And so I got a job offer at another company, and they came back and like, whoa, what's going on? We want you to stay. And I said, well, your inventory is a problem, at least give me a chance to fix it. And so they made me inventory control manager. So then I got a huge team under me, and we put a system in place, stopped losing parts, and kind of transformed. We really were able to lower inventory a lot, utilize floor space. We had about 1 million square feet. So it was a big deal. And then from there, I kind of just took over different areas of operations. Probably every year I took over project management the year after, and then I took over as general manager, and then eventually COO, and then CEO. And then they, my father and his partner sold about 5 years ago to private equity. They signed me on as CEO, and built more. We were right in the middle of COVID. We had great COVID times because we did Home Depot and Lowe's business, and they were essential, and everybody was working on their homes, so that was great. And then the corporate culture kind of got to me, and I left a couple years ago and bought a trucking company. I wanted to get into logistics just because I don't think it's going anywhere. I know there's automation and electrification and things, but those would just go with the industry. And there's a lot of opportunity there. So I went and did that, and I've been running that. And very soon we're going to be opening a brokering company to go along with the trucking company to expand and diversify so that we can take on more business.
Thanks for sharing that. Chuck, let's stay with you for a minute. Talk about your take on leadership. When you mentioned, like, when I first went into a leadership role running that inventory department, were you thinking of yourself as a leader at that time?
My inspiration, I guess, to become a leader was I knew I could do it better,
Mm,
and I was very frustrated. And when I was younger, when you're young, you kind of like, I can fix this immediately. Just let me take care of it, which isn't really how it
right.
works in the real
So
world. I
true.
mean,
It's so true.
you can have the greatest idea and unlimited energy, but if you don't have a way to communicate it, or if you don't have a team, you're really not going to succeed by just bashing through the wall. Luckily, the inventory control position was more of a shop position. So I
Mm,
was able to kind of get away from the front office and kind of just bash through the wall and just go out and build racking and really understand my team. And they were able to see results pretty quickly. I mean, it was, hey, let's stop losing parts. And once we stopped losing parts, like, okay, that we've never had that before in 20 years of history. Well, what else can you do? Well, we can do, then you start building some momentum and people start listening to you at meetings. But before that, you just think, I can do it better. I know I can. I'm part of, I'm in the trenches. Give me a shot. And so that's why I had to go, and basically they weren't giving me a shot. So I got another job to show that I was serious. They luckily gave me a shot, and that turned into my big leadership position.
So you saw a problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? Went out, solved the problem, and kind of established your credibility, right? And then kind
Mm-hmm.
of once you were known as a problem solver, now people are bringing you more problems, which gives you kind of more people and more projects, right? And more parts of the business to lead and to build from there. Ashley, how's that resonate with you?
I mean, 100%, honestly. I feel like as a leader, like being in leadership, a big part of it is problem solving, and critical thinking to solve that
Mm,
problem. Like you both mentioned, a lot of things that people have given us or asked us to do. An average person or someone that's, not quite yet a leader, may like stray away from out of, being afraid or for whatever reason. But we have to be critical thinkers. thinking outside of the box. And honestly, that's how I got into real estate again. When I moved to Texas, it was, again, it sounds easy, like, hey, let's move outside of your home state. It was one
Oh,
of the
that does not sound easy.
Oh my gosh, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And again, never being here in Texas, like I was a brand new citizen, it was a lot. So the problem that I solved, again, it sounds simple, but I pretty much aimed my business towards relocators, and I became the person that
Mm.
I wish I would have had when I moved to Texas. So it's, it's about a lot more than like, hey, let me help you find a home. Getting them acquainted with the community, things to do like for work and for fun, and also building relationships, because being like an outsider in a new state, that in itself can be a lot. So I feel like you have to critically think, not only to solve the problem that you're given, but like additional problems that will come up down the line.
Mhm. So same track as far as like saw a problem, stepped in to solve the problem, and in your case you did it as an entrepreneur, right? Kind of not as someone in a corporate setting or in a business setting or a manufacturing setting, really like Chuck's had.
Yeah.
But same idea, right? I saw an issue, and I think kind of like you said, like leaders lead, right? Like folks step in. Other types of folks are going to wait for more instruction. This is an interesting question actually for both of you. There's kind of I don't know if it's a perception or a misperception out there that like leaders are born, not made. I'm interested in both of your takes on that. Chuck, how about let's start with you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can see an argument for both. I mean, there's some people, their personality is just, um, hey, I just want you to tell me what to do. I mean, I have areas of my life that I don't want to lead.
Mm,
I was in a father-daughter group, um, that was just fathers and daughters in a big camp out setting, and you go bowling and you go ice skating. It's just a way to kind of connect with them, and I did not want to lead it. I had a lot of people just go, yeah, we want you to do it, you're going to do it right. I'm like, no, I just don't want to. Just tell me where I'm going and and I just want to have fun. I don't want to deal with the budgeting and the ceremonial stuff. And but when it comes down to like things that are just like career and family, I typically naturally will just lead on that. So I would say like some people are put in a position where they're forced to lead, and they do it, but maybe they're not amazing at it, and maybe it's not their skill. So I would lean more towards born with, honestly. I think you have to have that personality, and I don't know why I have that. I mean, my dad has it. Um, my mom probably has it a little bit, but my sibling doesn't really have it. So, I can't really tell you what the secret sauce is.
Ashley, what's your take?
I agree. I feel like it's a little bit of both. But I think honestly, I feel like you're born with it. Growing up, I did not, I come from Chicago. My family, my mom was a single mom. So, on paper, I'm not supposed to be like where I am today. But I feel like they've always seen something in me even before I've seen it in myself. So it's kind of something that you have to be born with. And honestly, it forced me to put myself in certain rooms. It forced me to be confident in certain areas. Being like a woman of color, especially in Texas. I'm still perceived pretty young. So, I have several challenges that are against me, but
Mhm.
and people always see things in me. So it kind of pushes me to, do my best and do more. And ultimately it's worked for me, but I think it's important, and this, goes into some things we'll probably talk about later. But like empowering others is a big part of being a leader, because if certain people would have never empowered me, I wouldn't be sitting here as a leader to speak. So yeah, I definitely think it's something you're born with. Sometimes, it has to be pulled out of you for whatever reason, but I think you're born with it for sure.
But I think the opportunity is key, right? Like you both talked about having an opportunity yourselves, right? And in Chuck's case, in some cases, he said no to that opportunity. And actually, you probably have too, right? I know I have, but in some cases, like somebody opened a door for you, even if just a little bit, to let you have a shot, right? And so I think there's kind of a natural piece that leaders have, but I think there's also an opportunity perspective here. I think there's a socialization perspective of this. I know for kind of women of a certain age, AKA my generation, like what we were told we could and couldn't do. It's very different, Ashley, than hopefully what your generation is hearing. Like I would be patted on the head and told to go over there more often than I care to count. Or I was the kind of exception to the rule. I was the one woman in the room many, many times, but that wasn't normal, quote unquote. I was different. I don't think I was, right? I think I just didn't care that I was the only person in the room and just kind of went with it. But somebody opened that door to get me in that room, right? And so I think the opportunity is key. So Ashley, talk about creating opportunities for others. What were you thinking in that regard?
Yeah, so I feel like people again look at me and they're always like, "Oh, like how do you do this? Like what's your secret?" And there's nothing on paper that I can say like, "Oh, you need to do this." But I feel like a big part of it is like confidence because for whatever reason, people, have doubts about themselves. Whether it's like their education level, their socio status, or the amount of money that they make. So whatever reason, like people think that they are limited. 9 times out of 10, like I've been there. So if I can like do it and like, have a vision for myself and reach my dreams and honestly put the work in because it's not easy to do. I just want to be, like inspirational to others. But also like I, pride myself on being like a lifelong learner. So like I never want to be like the smartest person in the room. I feel like I'm always learning something every day, whether it's like professional, personal. So just, creating those opportunities for others, continuing to expand my team as I continue to grow my businesses, putting people in front of others the same way that I was put in front of other people,
Mhm.
opportunity for myself. So just doing what I've always, it's kind of been like an innate thing growing up. Like I never thought about like, oh, even something like being in Horizons until I'm like an adult now and people are like, why are you, I've never met anyone like you. And I credit a big part of it to meeting people or people that I've met at Horizons. Growing up, it was like, oh, we're just going on a field trip. But like now as an adult, I see the bigger picture. So the same way that people, programs, some jobs created opportunities for me, I want to be able to create those opportunities for others.
That's fantastic. Chuck, talk about how you've developed leaders in your roles over time.
Yeah, I mean, just the hunger that we kind of explained that we had, you see that in other people. So when you have a team and you see people that are mad because they think they can do it better, give them a chance because that's exactly how we got to where we are. And that's, you're only as strong as your team. So I'm a big proponent of like, if something goes wrong, it's I messed up. And if something goes right, we succeeded,
Mm.
and bring everybody with you. And, that just gets you respect from your team, and it's mutual. So, you don't ask them to do something that you wouldn't do. You're transparent, you're
Mhm.
communicative of what the end goal is. You kind of, I'm not huge on corporate speak. I like to just kind of go right through that and simplify it, and not because people don't understand it, but I just don't think that it has a lot of what we have today with all the AI generation and all the, the middle manager type stuff just seems to confuse people, including myself, of, okay, what did we really just say there? Um, let's just say it like it is. And then, you know, like Ashley said, have other people bring their experiences to the table, and, just really engage with them on what their ideas are, and not be the smartest one in the room and just take a back seat sometimes. Sometimes as a leader, just you showing up will ruin a meeting because people think that you're there to put yourself on a pedestal because they've seen it a million times with other leaders when you're really just there to observe. So maybe don't go to the meeting. Maybe see what they come up with, or just kind of help them along behind the scenes. It's probably like the top three most important thing to being a leader is and developing a strong team, because you literally can't be one without a strong team. I mean,
You said something really interesting when you said when you see people that are mad that they think they can do it better. Like I hadn't ever thought of it that before, but if I think back to myself and if I think back to other people I've tapped, like there is a level of frustration. Like, why are we doing this quote unquote wrong? Right? Like
mhm.
and it's because we can see it. Right?
Yeah.
Ashley, does that resonate with you? I feel like it has to.
Oh yeah, 1000%. Especially moving, I'm gonna go back to when I worked in physical therapy because things were so different when I moved here to Texas. And I wouldn't say I got angry about it. It was almost comical in a way because, if people have gotten so far doing things like the old school way or their traditional way, it just made me be like, oh, like if you would listen to me, like look how far we can get.
Hmm.
So, I mean, 1000%, but I feel like the key is like the current leader being open to the new ideas, which is why it's so important to be a continuous learner. Because if that person wouldn't have listened to me when I first got here, we wouldn't have grown the company to like an 8-figure business in a year. So I feel like, it takes that angry person or that concerned person, but it also takes like an open-minded leader to be receptive to what they're hearing.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And Ashley, anything you heard from Chuck that's resonating with you about what you're looking for as you're kind of developing as a leader? Anything else that he talked about or anything that he didn't talk about that you would add as to like what you're looking for as you're developing your leadership skills?
Yeah, I mean, aside from a team, I'm always looking to grow my team because, like you mentioned, I feel like I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I always have new ideas. I kind of just live my life, and people are always like, oh, how can I do this? So I'm always trying to think of a way to make it into a business. So I feel like the team is key. Like I have a team for my real estate business, whether it's like a transaction coordinator, a photographer who takes my social media content. I work with a team at my corporate job, and we work very closely with our CEO. So, being on a team around other people. But also, I would love to, meet other people who are just as hungry as like I once was. And like Chuck mentioned, I feel like sometimes they're afraid to come to us because, you know, a lot of leaders have kind of put a bad taste in people's mouths and like made themselves seem like untouchable for whatever reason. But I welcome new ideas. I welcome new talents because, again, you may know something that I may not know. So I would love to meet, like, younger entrepreneurs who can teach me something to continue to elevate my business and, eventually work with me with one of my ideas.
You've both touched on accessibility, right? And kind of, I talk to leaders a lot about how as accessible as we might intend to be or think we even are, that perception's not usually the same. And it may or may not have anything to do with us personally. Maybe it does, because maybe we think we're kind of open door type people, but maybe we're not exactly in the way that we hope we are. Or two, or both really, folks have had a bad experience someplace else, right? And like they brought up an idea that one time and just got shut down, and that's what's running in the back of their minds. How do you all, Chuck, how do you approach this kind of getting people to talk to you, right? You said sometimes when the leader walks into the meeting, they ruin the meeting. I think that's real. I think that's true in some cases. I talk to leaders a lot about when to go first and when to go last. Right, times when if you're brainstorming and a leader speaks up, like brainstorm over, right? Like now we have the road that we're going down because everybody's going to follow that path.
Mhm.
Versus if it's a time to be vulnerable, leader absolutely goes first, right?
Sure.
So Chuck, how do you think about that and approach that?
I mean, the first thing I did was I moved my office to the place where everybody's working.
Mm,
So when I was inventory control manager, I left the front, I went to the back. I technically still had the front office, but there's no reason for me to be there if I'm trying to solve an issue. And I was back, even as COO, my office was in like a temporary little shack with no windows or anything in the shipping area, just because I wanted everybody, when you're kind of in the trenches, it's funny when you walk on the floor in a manufacturing environment or even in an office, how many people will ask you questions. And then you go, well, what if I wouldn't have done that walk? What would they have
mhm,
done? And who would have they had asked? And what kind of decisions would they have made? And maybe they didn't get the correct guidance. And there's a little, there's a balance there. But, just being with the group, but kind of being ahead. I always use the analogy like we get to a river, um, you know, I'm going to help you build the bridge to cross it while we're learning how to do it. And then the next river, the team can do it themselves. So we would always, okay, what's the next problem? Okay, whether I got to jump on a forklift or whether I have to go visit a vendor overseas, whatever it is, you do that. And then everyone's like, okay, well, my leader did it. It's not too low for them. I'll do anything that needs to be done as well. And then again, that mutual respect comes. And then the next time something happens, they kind of just know the playbook. And now you've got that much better of a team where you can now start focusing on other things instead of keep hitting the same problem. And the vulnerability, like you said, is huge. You do need to show vulnerability. I mean, it's something that's human and people relate to that. And if you do that, they also show you vulnerabilities and you can help them if they're feeling like things aren't going well. You know, they might turn to you instead of trying to hide it and maybe internalizing it and taking way too long to do that, when you could be like, hey, why don't you take the day off and come back fresh tomorrow, instead of them just trying to stress over things that they're not really controlling at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. You talked about presence because there's like a spiritual presence where I'm trying to be present to people. You were going to be physically present, was your point. Like moved your office, made sure you were in the area where the folks that needed you were, so that you were more directly accessible. And then also kind of the idea of modeling and then getting out of the way, right? Like an old boss of mine, someone I have a lot of respect for, Mike Mulqueen, who used to run the Greater Chicago Food Depository. His philosophy was kind of hire the right people, put him in the right role, get the heck out of the way, except for he wouldn't have said heck. And so I've kind
But
of
the
took that
balance
from
is
him.
crazy because getting out of the way, if you have a high title, especially like an executive title, people automatically, even if you're sitting right next to them, are scared. Okay, this is an officer or whatever. Oh, I don't want to.
Yeah.
And so getting out of the way, you don't want to just go to your ivory tower. You want to be working on the next thing with maybe a different team, but that team that you got out of the way from, who's better at it than you are and will ever be now, sees now that you're constantly working in different avenues of the company and solving different issues, so that even if they're not getting your full attention, they know that, oh, okay, they're working on a finance project right now and I see them grinding in, in the conference room all the time. They're just aware and you don't even have to spell it out.
And that's a really smart way to make it really clear that you trust them, right? You're not sitting in your office pacing, wondering how they're doing or looking over their shoulder. You're literally out of the way and you've handed it over. Like that's a really smart tactic to demonstrate trust and to show people how serious you are about them being able to do the job. That's really great insight. Thanks for that. Want to make sure you both have time to ask each other questions. Ashley, questions that you might have for Chuck.
Yes, I was waiting for this moment. Let me pull up my question list.
All right.
So my first question was, would you mind sharing like some of the habits that you feel like were like crucial and like most beneficial to you as a new business owner, or like a new leader, being thrown into that CEO?
Yeah, I mean, I can do both because going into the trucking industry, I basically knew nothing. I didn't know, I knew nothing about trucking. I did my diligence and I went through the financials and everything, but I never had been in a semi truck. I never understood, but I ended up getting my CDL and, trying to learn everything. So I would say organization is extremely important. I've seen a lot of companies and reviewed a lot of company decks and things like that with Colony. And when I was looking to purchase a company, I wasn't just looking at trucking companies. I was looking at everything from electrical contractor companies to whatever. And you can tell right off the bat the ones that are organized or not. And the amount of just waste that goes with not being organized is, I don't even think people can quantify it. So in my own personal, how I handle things, I always have to have a notebook or some task related thing for my short-term items. And then you've got your long-term goals, which constantly change. I would say don't get hung up on a 1 to 2 year goal, because outside factors will change it. Internal factors will change it. The, government policy will change it. You can't really get stuck on that. So the other thing with being organized is that it removes the clutter so you can really focus on what you want to focus on. If you're constantly doubting, oh, is this really this way? Or are these numbers really these numbers? Then you can't really give your undivided attention to really what you want to handle. And I don't know about you, but once I actually can put my undivided attention on something, it takes me like 10% of the time that I thought it would. I'll be like in my head, I'll be like, oh, I got to work on this thing. And then my wife will be like, you're done. You're already done with that, right? And it was like a day. Yeah. Because I was able to set it aside and really just focus, but we have so much going on in our mind that that's what really slows us down.
Yeah.
So I think that's huge. I think for new business, cash flow is obviously probably the number one thing, making sure you're planning for the worst and just be pleasantly surprised if things get better. I've been through the Great Recession in 2008, COVID, probably 4 or 5 different cash flow situations with Colony. The trucking market isn't really great, so we're watching the cash flow there, and it'll take a lot of resources, especially if you're under financed or you really didn't plan well enough. It'll consume your entire day, and you can't really focus on any other part of the business. So those are really, really big things, in my opinion.
No, thank you for sharing that. And
Mhm.
then I have one more, like kind of piggybacking off of that question. What do you feel like was the biggest mistake that you've made in your career, and how has it shaped you to be who you are today?
That's interesting. Um, there's a lot of times where you have to make decisions without all the information. And I think as a leader, you just have to make the decision. And it's not always going to be right. But if you don't make the decision, you're not a great leader. Like you have to have some direction for the company. So I would say, yeah, I'm trying to think back to the trucking business. I've had a couple things where I just didn't fully understand what was going on and had to learn the hard way, at a much smaller scale than what was at Colony. And then at Colony, I would say the way I communicated with, before I was an executive, the way that I communicated with them and just didn't, they weren't listening when I was young. I would say when I was 28 and younger, I would write up business plans. I would just do everything I could possibly do, and they wouldn't even read them. And it was just, I had to, it changed how I was a leader. I had to let things bake a little bit. I remember making a decision. There was some HR thing, and I just made a decision in like 5 seconds. And then about an hour later, it completely changed. And if I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have had all this damage cleanup to do. And then I was like, oh, I still remember that moment. I'm like, oh, I should have just went to lunch and just
Mm.
see what happened with the drama. And I was just too fast with, I want to do this. I want to do this. I want to just do it really, really, really quick. And kind of like what Elon Musk is doing right now. He's taking things away until they break. And I stopped doing that because it just became too much. And I was able to get more, a better pace of still a change agent for making things happen, but not having to go back and redo things.
Nice. Okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I
Check.
can, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ash.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I feel like as you were talking, I feel like I can like hear pieces of like my inner self. When you said kind of like, trying to stay organized and picking a lane, that's something that I have to tell myself every day, to continue to execute and like grow where I am, because my mind is full of all of these ideas. But I've read all these leadership books and watched TV shows, and I feel like that's the one commonality that us as like leaders have, is like trying to do too much at once. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
something,
You won't get anything done if you do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
And I've been forced to. I've had project plans with 80 initiatives.
you.
And I was like, what are we going to do with this? Each one is 15 pages of, it's not going to happen. So me learning from how to communicate, and I think emotional intelligence is probably the number one most important thing for a leader. There's so many leaders that just don't have it and they don't know. And you don't hear about it if it's bad, except through the grapevine. If it's good, you hear it directly to your face. But if it's bad, you hear about it in murmurs and you're like, oh, but some people don't even recognize it. They just have no clue. But I think that what you're saying is, with taking a lane, and just what I realized is, if you're in a corporate environment, and my wife works for a big insurance company, and I know all this all too well, those 80 things, you literally just you can kind of nod and say, yep, they're on the radar, and you just pick a few that you're going to make a big impact for your team and the company, and they're in the same boat. They just can't see human. You can't even track it with AI, let alone real human beings. So it's, instead of getting stressed over how am I going to get all this done, I got to do this, and then today I got to do this, and then Tuesday I got to do this. Okay, what do we got here? Can we group them together? This stuff is just, this has to happen for this has to happen, or you just kind of go down the line and realize that it's never going to happen. It's probably, and you don't have to get clarification on that in every instance. You can just keep moving at a pace because you're already doing a lot better than the people that are non-leaders. And it just puts your mind at ease, and you can move forward with, getting 2 or 3 things done without having to stress about all the millions of things you think you have to do.
Chuck, could you say more about people not telling you when things aren't going well? Because I think a lot of people don't understand how incredibly common that is for leaders to have to suss out truth.
Yeah. So, I mean, once I became a leader, like a higher level leader, I would do one-on-ones and skip one-on-ones. Skip one-on-ones are more important than one-on-ones, in my opinion.
Preach.
And that's another thing with being present. So walking the floor, going to a location, if you have multiple locations, holding a meeting in a conference room you don't normally hold a meeting in. You'd be surprised at kind of just what you see and hear. But you have to actively be asking questions to get the feedback that something's not going right, because people will be afraid to tell you. And sometimes like, this isn't working. I can't get this done. Well, why? Well, because Bob over in HR, okay, and you just go walk over there and have a conversation, and then it's done. It could be a tiny, tiny obstacle that as a leader you can help remove, but without asking or really getting that feedback. And then with that emotional intelligence, when you're in your meetings, you have to pick up on cues, because they're not just going to flat out say it because they think they're disrespecting you and your leadership skills. I've had that, and they'll say something like, wait, what can you tell me? And then you just play dumb. Well, what do you mean? How does that work normally? Well, what about this? Okay, we're going to have a follow-up. And then you have to be smart enough to know not to cause political turmoil with the middle management group. Because if you work for me and you're saying something, you don't want me going to HR and talking to Bob that you're not happy about the obstacle, right? So I have to have the intelligence to gather all my data that it came from me independently. What I would do is talk to you directly and say, hey, I'm going to act like I found this problem. Are you okay with that? Yeah, if you can get me moving forward, cool. Okay, here's some data that I need, and I'm just going to run a report on my own computer, and then I'm going to bring it to them, and you won't even be a part of it, but tomorrow that problem will be gone. You okay with that? Yeah, cool. Or, hey, I don't care. I've been talking to them. If you can help me, then we go that route. But you have to really go and team up with your team to go, okay, what's the best approach here? And you're going to deal with it as a leader all over the place. You're going to have to deal with asking this department or telling this department without the other ones kind of knowing. Otherwise, they've got a lot of drama at a level lower than you, or 2 levels, that is counterproductive. And then you've got drama you have to deal with, which nobody really wants to deal with it, but you're creating it yourself if you don't really understand the relationships that are going on.
And I feel like as leaders, and I've been guilty of this myself, like we are hopeful, right? Like we believe in something, we're pushing forward because we can see the end, we can see how great it can work out. And so we're looking for kind of confirmation bias, right? Like we're looking for confirmation of that, and we can miss the subtle and even not so subtle signs that maybe this isn't going so smoothly. And it was a colleague, my good friend Tal Hasak Lowy, who kind of had to sit me down one day and say, I was kind of upset about something, then like, why can't I get an answer to this? And it's like, Audrey, they've been answering you, they're just not using direct words. Like, think about everything that's happened, you've gotten your answer. And that was like a mind-blowing moment for me that like really changed how I thought about things, because I was head down, push forward, let's go, let's check, right? And missing nuance. I missed nuance for a long time. And so understanding when anything other than a resounding yes actually means no is a really important lesson, I think, to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to wrap us up with a couple of questions to both of you. Best leadership advice you've ever received? Ashley?
Be a continuous learner. Don't
Mm,
be know-it-all. I pride myself on being a lifelong learner, and always having mentors and people that I can, reach out to. Like we were just talking about, like I don't want to be in a room full of like yes men. Someone needs to tell us as leaders no sometimes.
hmm.
So just having the correct network and being a continuous learner.
That's great. Chuck, how about you?
I would
What's important?
say it's don't get content. There is always something to do. It's a living, breathing organism, whatever you're trying to solve. And just because you solved all the problems this week or year or month, there's always it falls apart without nurturing. It's just constant. You have different people coming in and out. And sometimes when you have a big win, you know leaders will, and we've all probably seen examples of it, and everyone's guilty of it themselves. So you're like, oh, okay, I just went through that, we've got a win, I've got a little bit of breathing room. There's always something, if you look hard enough, that you can constantly improve, and don't just rest on your laurels.
Similar responses. Interesting. And then kind of last question, um, Chuck, is there a leadership mantra or any type of mantra that you live by?
I mean, respect is my number one value. I think respect, no matter who you're talking to, is very, very important. But there's two like kind of quotes that I use is don't stress over what you can't control.
Mm,
I have to tell myself this all the time, and sometimes my family has to tell me this. Like, hey, if you can't control it, all you can do is gather the information and then try to move forward. But that's one of them. And then a smooth sea does not make a good sailor. So
oh,
all if you're sailing and everything's perfect, you're not going to become a great sailor. But if you're sailing through storms and you get a hole in the boat and you learn how to fix that, and then someone falls overboard and you save them, like you can, that stuff is just all stuff to put in the bank that helps you move forward. So unfortunately, the fastest way to gain experience is by fire and going through really hard times. And it might not seem like it at the time, and it might, and even when you get through it, you're like, oh, I'm done with the hard times. You're not. There's always something that's new that's going to come, where you're, as a leader, and if you're very entrepreneurial, like you are, actually, you're going to make these problems because you're going to chase problems. And the nature of that business is you're going to have to deal with tough times. You're not going to have all the information and things aren't going to go right. So getting comfortable with not stressing over what you don't control and kind of banking it, and using that as experience is pretty key to just having a healthy mindset. Otherwise you can just stress yourself to death on it, as a leader.
thanks
Yeah.
for that, Chuck.
Mhm.
Ashley, I want to give you the final word. Is there a leadership mantra or life mantra that you live by?
Yes. Before I do mine, can I just tell like a short story in
Please.
regards to that last one that Chuck just shared? So my first like year and a half in real estate, I made a group of friends. We all got our license together. I think I sold like two like very small homes. I did like 400,000 in sales. And not that much. Like, I was barely paying my bills. And I would say like 90% of the people who I like started the journey with, by year two, when you have to renew your license, 90% of those people were gone.
Mm,
I kept, I stayed true. I fought through the seas, and the following year I did 3 million in sales. So though I had months without any sales, I had little side hustles to make money. But if I would have quit, I would have never got to that point in my business that I never even dreamed of selling that much. And that's a goal that I'm trying to beat now. But I think that second mantra that you shared was just so true, because nothing is ever going to be easy. But nothing that's easy is like worth the fight. So if
Yep.
it's worth it, you have to put in that work and put in that fight. So I'm gonna write that second one down, Chuck.
All right.
um, but the one that I live by is lead with vision, serving with my heart, and inspiring by example. Anything that I do from in my life, with my family and my professional life, it's always led with like my heart. And God has found a way to monetize it for me and to put me in this position that I'm, in today, even sitting here and speaking with you too. But I've always like, served with my heart. And then just leading by example, because there's no like black and white book that I can write to, how to be successful, how to be a leader. I can only share my story, the good and the bad, and inspire others to do the same. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have some months where you don't make any money, but you have to hustle, you have to fight. So I think that's my favorite one, just leading by example and serving with my heart, because that's what makes me the leader that you guys see today.
Well, thank you both so much for doing this today. It was really helpful to hear both of your perspectives, to gain some insights. I think you both brought up some really great points that others can learn from. I hope you learned from each other. I know I certainly am taking away some lessons from this as well. Chuck, I also hadn't heard that. How does that go again?
A
Calm
smooth
seas.
sea does not make a good sailor.
One more time.
A smooth sea does
Smooth
not make
sea,
a good
smooth sea.
sailor.
Yeah,
There's
that's
other ways to say it, but if you Google it, there's probably more elegant ways to say it. A
mhm,
smooth sea, good sailor does not make or something, but
right.
yeah, I like it because I always, in the rough times, you just tell yourself that, okay, we're going to get through this storm, and you can use the whatever analogy you want. And then, oh, now I know what to do the next time.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll end there. Thanks so much to both of you. Appreciate you for
Thank
doing
you.
this.
All right. Thanks for having us.